Do you trust what you see in the news? It's a question we often skip over. We scroll, we hear headlines, missiles, negotiations, sanctions, but we rarely stop and ask, what does this really mean? Or more importantly, how does this affect the way we understand the world, and even ourselves? Let me take you back to a single moment. It's 2015. A deal was struck, one that many believed could change the future of the Middle East, even of global diplomacy. Iran agreed to limit its nuclear program. The world exhaled. For the first time in decades, hope entered the picture. But not long after, that hope unraveled. One country pulled out, sanctions returned, and trust, hard-earned and fragile, was shattered once more. And today? We're watching the pieces, still broken, still moving. Negotiations start, stall, and start again. Nuclear warnings rise, disappear, then return. Everyone is talking, but no one seems to agree on what's true, or what's fair. The question keeps returning, can we ever rebuild trust once it's lost? If you're learning English to understand the world more deeply, this lesson is for you. This story is not just about Iran. It's about power, fear, promises made and broken. It's about how nations talk, or stop talking, and how that shapes the future we all share. Over the next few minutes, I invite you to listen, not just with your ears, but with your curiosity. Don't worry if some of the words feel new. This isn't just about learning English. It's about learning how to think clearly in English. Together, we'll explore the headlines and the history, the politics and the psychology behind one of the most complex dilemmas of our time. Let's begin with a question that sounds simple, but isn't. Why would a country want nuclear power, and why would the world be afraid of it? Let's dig deeper into that question. Why would a country pursue nuclear power, and why does it spark so much fear? It's a modern paradox. Nuclear energy is one of the most powerful tools humanity has ever developed. It can light entire cities, reduce carbon emissions, and promise a cleaner future. But at the same time, it holds the capacity to destroy entire nations in seconds. Iran insists its nuclear program is peaceful, meant for medical research, electricity, and national pride. And yet, much of the world suspects something else, the secret desire to build a nuclear bomb. The same technology that powers hospitals can also power warheads. This is the central dilemma. But let's step back. Iran is a country with a long and rich history, home to ancient civilizations, great poets, and cultural treasures. Yet for the past few decades, its modern story has been deeply shaped by international isolation. After the 1979 Islamic Revolution, relations with the West, especially the United States, began to unravel. Trust, once fragile, eventually disappeared. Since then, Iran has faced wave after wave of economic sanctions. These are restrictions placed by other countries, limits on trade, banking, oil exports. Sanctions are meant to apply pressure, to force a country to change behavior. But they also deeply affect ordinary people. The price of medicine goes up, businesses close, inflation rises. And here lies another paradox. The more the West applies pressure, the more Iran insists on independence. The more Iran insists on nuclear rights, the more the West fears its intentions. It's a cycle. Pressure leads to resistance. Resistance leads to more pressure. At the heart of it all is one word: trust. But trust doesn't grow easily in the soil of fear. And even more difficult, once broken, trust rarely returns. Let's also not forget this: other countries have nuclear weapons. The US, Russia, China, France, the UK, India, Pakistan, North Korea, all have them. Israel is widely believed to have them, though it has never officially confirmed it. So why is Iran being singled out? Supporters of sanctions argue that Iran has a history of hiding parts of its nuclear program, violating international agreements, and supporting armed groups in other countries. They say, Iran cannot be trusted with this kind of power. But critics ask another question: is this about global safety, or about who gets to control power in the world? That's the deeper issue we're approaching. Is the world truly trying to prevent nuclear war, or is it trying to control who gets to play at the table of global influence? As English learners, thinking about this helps you connect language with real-world complexity. When you hear the words sanctions, or enrichment, or non-proliferation, you'll begin to understand the emotional and political weight these words carry. This isn't just a vocabulary lesson, it's a lesson in how language shapes the way we think about fairness, danger, and diplomacy. And now, let's move from questions of morality and power to what we can actually see happening around us: media headlines, diplomatic tensions, and the visible signals that the world is still struggling to find answers. Open a news app. Type in Iran. What do you see? Most likely, sanctions tightened. Uranium enrichment increased. US says talks failing. Israel issues warning. New missile tests. Protests erupt. Internet shut down. Over and over, the same words echo: nuclear, sanctions, threat, violation. The story feels stuck, like a broken record. But underneath that repetition are some very real, very current developments that show us just how alive and unstable this situation still is. In 2015, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, known as the Iran Nuclear Deal, was signed between Iran and 6 major world powers. Iran agreed to limit its nuclear activity and allow international inspections in return for the lifting of sanctions. For a while, it worked. Iran reduced its stockpile of enriched uranium, and the economy slowly reopened. Foreign companies entered the market. Ordinary Iranians felt a glimmer of hope. But in 2018, the United States withdrew from the deal under the Trump administration. Sanctions returned, and with them, deep frustration inside Iran. In response, Iran began breaking parts of the agreement, step by step, enriching uranium beyond agreed limits, restricting inspectors, restarting advanced centrifuges. By 2023, international observers warned Iran's nuclear program had advanced to the point where it could potentially build a bomb within weeks, if it chose to. Let's be clear, that doesn't mean Iran has decided to build a bomb. But the technology is there. The knowledge is there. And that alone is enough to alarm many countries, especially Israel, which considers a nuclear Iran an existential threat. So what are the visible consequences? One is a growing military shadow. Israel has repeatedly said it will do whatever it takes to prevent Iran from going nuclear, including military strikes. The U.S. maintains a strong naval presence in the Gulf. Iranian-backed groups in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen are increasingly active, leading to fears of a wider regional conflict. Meanwhile, Iran is building closer ties with other major powers like China and Russia, both economically and diplomatically. In 2023, Iran officially joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and was invited to join the BRICS group. That's a clear sign: Iran is not waiting for Western approval anymore. It's looking east. On the domestic front, things are no less tense. The economy is under severe stress. Inflation is high. The Iranian currency has lost much of its value. Protests, particularly among women and younger generations, continue to grow. In 2022, the death of Mahsa Amini triggered a wave of demonstrations against the government's strict moral codes and political repression. The government responded with crackdowns, internet blackouts, and arrests. So what does this all mean for the nuclear issue? It means Iran is operating under pressure, external and internal. It means the nuclear program is not just about weapons or energy. It's also about identity, resistance, and survival. For the Iranian government, nuclear development is a symbol: we will not be bullied. For others in the region, it's a threat: if they cross the line, it will start a war. And yet, negotiations continue. Quiet talks in Vienna. Private channels. Messages pass through intermediaries. Because as long as the stakes are this high, diplomacy is the only alternative to disaster. This cycle of pressure, resistance, and talk is not unique to Iran. We've seen similar tensions around North Korea, Russia, even Venezuela. But Iran is unique in one sense: it sits at the intersection of East and West, religion and politics, oil and ideology. That makes every move, every word, every sanction, carry more weight than usual. So here's a question for you to think about, and I'd love for you to answer it in the comments. Do you believe sanctions are a fair tool for keeping peace, or do they cause more harm than good? Try expressing your opinion in English, even if it's just a few sentences. This is your chance to connect your language skills to real-world issues that matter. In the next section, we'll go even deeper. We'll look beyond the headlines and explore the hidden dynamics, the power games, the economic calculations, and the strategies that shape how the world deals with Iran, not just publicly, but behind the scenes. Now let's step behind the curtain, to the world that isn't always shown on your news feed. Because the conflict over Iran's nuclear program isn't just about safety. It's also about control. It's about who gets to shape the rules of the global game, and who gets punished for trying to play differently. Let's start with the basics. When we hear sanctions, we often think it's about stopping a dangerous government. But sanctions are also a powerful political tool, a way to shape global behavior without using armies. And the country that holds the strongest control over sanctions? The United States. Why? Because the US dollar is the backbone of the global financial system. Most international trade, even between countries that aren't American allies, still happens in dollars. That gives the US extraordinary power. It can tell banks, companies, even other governments, if you do business with Iran, you lose access to our market. That's not just pressure, it's a kind of economic isolation. This isn't a conspiracy. It's how the system works. And that system creates winners and losers. Countries that follow US interests get favorable treatment. Those that challenge them, like Iran, get cut off. Of course, the US says it uses these tools to protect peace. And sometimes, they do prevent dangerous actions. But critics argue, what if these tools are also used to punish independence? To stop countries from choosing a different path, especially if that path challenges Western dominance? This brings us to another hidden dynamic: nuclear hypocrisy. 9 countries officially have nuclear weapons. Some of them, like the US and Russia, have thousands. But the Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, the international agreement that governs nuclear technology, says that only those who had weapons before 1967 can legally keep them. Everyone else must agree not to build them. That's the rule. But is it fair? India and Pakistan developed nuclear weapons outside the treaty and faced limited consequences. Israel, as mentioned earlier, is believed to have nuclear weapons but has never signed the treaty. Yet none of them face the kind of crushing sanctions Iran faces. Why? Some say the answer is simple: alliances. India and Israel are strategic partners to the US. Pakistan has deep military ties with China. Iran, on the other hand, has been an ideological opponent of US foreign policy for over 40 years. So what we're seeing is not just a debate over weapons. It's a debate over who gets to decide what is responsible behavior and what happens when a nation refuses to follow the dominant narrative. There's also another layer: energy politics. Iran has some of the largest oil and natural gas reserves in the world. But because of sanctions, much of its potential is blocked. Other energy exporting nations benefit when Iran is restricted. Global oil prices can be influenced by how much Iranian oil is on the market. The less Iran can sell, the higher global prices tend to rise, benefiting rivals like Saudi Arabia, the US, and even Russia. So the sanctions aren't just about bombs. They're also about economic competition. And there's the algorithmic layer too. Every time you search for Iran, every news clip you watch, every headline you click, an algorithm is learning. It begins to show you certain types of content. Maybe more about Iran's threats, less about Iran's history. More about missile tests, less about sanctions' effects on everyday people. This isn't about censorship, it's about visibility. What's repeated becomes true. What's hidden becomes forgotten. This subtle power, the power of framing, of information flow, is just as important as missiles or money. And it shapes how we, as global citizens, see Iran. Are we seeing a dangerous regime that must be stopped? Or a proud nation being pushed into a corner? These aren't easy questions. But that's exactly why we must ask them. And this brings us to the human side, the psychology of fear, obedience, and resistance. Because even with all the power and politics in the world, it's still people, leaders, soldiers, parents, students, who make decisions. In the next section, we'll explore how ordinary minds respond to extraordinary pressure. But before we continue, here's something to think about. If a country breaks the rules of a system they never agreed was fair, should they still be punished for it? Let that question sit with you. We often imagine international politics as a game played by presidents, generals, and diplomats. But the real impact, the emotional weight of it all, is carried by ordinary people. People who wake up each morning, go to work, raise children, and hope for a future that feels less fragile. So how does a society respond when it lives under constant pressure, political, economic, psychological? Let's start with Iranian citizens. For many, sanctions are not an abstract concept. They are real. They mean higher food prices, shortages of medicine, limited access to technology, dreams of studying abroad delayed or crushed. Parents fear their children will grow up in a country that's disconnected from the rest of the world. Businesses shut down not because they failed, but because banks refused to process payments. And yet, people adapt. They find new ways to survive. They build local businesses, trade through unofficial channels, rely on creativity. Iranian youth are some of the most active internet users in the region, even when the government censors content or cuts off access during protests. Through VPNs and social media, they stay informed and connected. But the pressure also creates exhaustion. And that exhaustion leads to a psychological phenomenon called normalization of the abnormal. When something painful or unjust becomes part of everyday life, we stop questioning it. We get used to it. Imagine being born after the 1979 revolution. You've never known a world without sanctions. You've never lived in a society where your passport gives you equal access, where your economy is fully open, where your voice on global platforms isn't filtered through suspicion. After decades of this, many Iranians feel stuck between two walls. On one side, a government they don't fully trust. On the other, a world that seems to punish them no matter what they do. This kind of double alienation leads to a deep feeling of helplessness. Some people turn inward, focusing only on their personal lives. Others join protests. And some just leave, if they can. Now let's look outside Iran. In Western societies, many people don't think much about Iran beyond the headlines. They hear nuclear threat, and fear takes over. Politicians often use this fear to justify hardline policies. But how many actually understand the history? The sanctions? The people behind the politics? Psychologists say that humans have a bias called group attribution error. We tend to judge individuals based on the actions of their group. If a government acts aggressively, we assume all its people support it. But this thinking is flawed and dangerous. The truth is, many Iranians are among the most pro-dialogue, pro-education, and globally curious populations in the region. But sanctions and international isolation often silence those voices. The global system creates distance and misunderstanding. And misunderstanding leads to mistrust. That's where propaganda becomes powerful. Governments, on all sides, use emotional messaging to keep people afraid. They play old footage of angry protests. They repeat words like terrorist, axis of evil, or threat to our values. These narratives aren't just about truth, they're about control. And people internalize those stories. They start to believe, maybe we can't trust them. Or even worse, maybe they'll never change. That's how fear becomes policy. But here's something incredible: despite all the pressure, despite all the conflict, most people, on all sides, don't want war. They don't want destruction. What they want is dignity. Fair treatment. A future where their children have opportunities. We must ask, why do systems built by humans make it so hard for humans to simply live? And what can we do about it? In the next part, we'll move toward a more hopeful space. We'll talk about awareness, self-education, and what it means to stay informed in a world full of noise. Because even when the world feels overwhelming, change can start with understanding. And understanding starts with listening, just like you're doing now. If we've learned anything so far, it's this: the world isn't simple. Good guys and bad guys, these labels might work in movies, but not in real life. Especially not when we're dealing with decades of conflict, distrust, and deeply human fear. So how do we move forward? Not with blind optimism, but with clear eyes and open minds. First, we need to recognize that trust is a process, not an event. Countries like Iran don't wake up one day and decide to become friendly. And the same goes for global powers. Healing decades of suspicion and pain takes time. And yet, it is possible. We've seen moments when diplomacy worked. The 2015 nuclear deal, also known as the JCPOA, was one of those rare moments. It wasn't perfect. But it was proof that enemies could sit at the same table, speak through translators, and still reach an agreement. For a short while, sanctions eased. Iran shipped out much of its enriched uranium. International inspectors gained access. And ordinary Iranians began to hope maybe the world was finally ready to treat them fairly. But when the deal collapsed in 2018, so did that fragile hope. Still, even after that setback, the desire for peaceful coexistence remains strong in many hearts. From students in Tehran who want to study abroad, to business owners in Berlin or Tokyo who want to trade freely, to ordinary people in the US who are simply tired of endless conflict, the longing for something better is real. And that's where you come in. You're not a president or a diplomat. But as a learner, a thinker, a person trying to understand the world, you're part of something powerful. Because awareness leads to empathy. Empathy leads to dialogue. And dialogue, if done right, can lead to real change. It starts with asking better questions. Not who is right, but why do they believe they're right? Not who should we punish, but what would a fair system look like for everyone? And it also means challenging what we hear. Next time a headline says, Iran is threatening the West, pause and ask, what's the context? Is this new? Is it a reaction to something else? Could there be more to the story? This doesn't mean defending harmful actions. It means being intellectually honest, seeking a full picture before making judgments. It also means recognizing that sometimes, truth depends on where you're standing. For an Iranian mother, sanctions might feel like cruelty. For a Western policymaker, they might seem like protection. Both are valid emotional reactions. But only through communication can we find something in the middle. Learning English is part of this journey. Because English isn't just a language of grammar and exams, it's a language of global conversation. When you understand it well, you unlock access to news, research, perspectives from all over the world. You can compare sources. You can listen to opposing views. You can build a map of truth, not a wall of opinion. And maybe, one day, you'll be the one explaining this to someone else. A friend. A child. A community. And that's how trust begins again. Not just between nations, but between people. So ask yourself this. What kind of world are we building if we only listen to our side of the story? And more importantly, what kind of world could we build if we all learn to listen better? Let's keep exploring. In the next part, we'll pause for a moment, not for reflection, but for practice. It's time to break down some of the vocabulary and expressions we've heard so far, so you can use them in your own conversations and writing. Now let's take a step back and focus on the language. Throughout this video, we've used some powerful vocabulary and expressions, words that not only help you understand complex topics, but also express your thoughts with more precision. Here are 10 useful expressions and structures from this lesson that you can apply in your own speaking and writing. I'll explain what they mean and give a quick example for each. 1. Walk a tightrope. This idiom means to be in a difficult situation where you have to carefully balance opposing forces. Example: diplomats often walk a tightrope between showing strength and keeping the peace. 2. Normalization of the abnormal. This phrase describes a process where people get used to something unhealthy or unjust, simply because it's constant. Example, after years of economic pressure, the shortage of medicine became a case of normalization of the abnormal. 3. On the surface, but beneath that. This structure helps show contrast between what appears to be true and what is actually true. Example, on the surface, the sanctions seemed like a political strategy, but beneath that, they hurt ordinary people the most. 4. Narrative control. This term refers to how governments or media shape the way people understand events by controlling information. Example, both sides used narrative control to influence public opinion during the negotiations. 5. Double alienation. A feeling of being rejected or isolated from two different directions, often from your own country and the outside world. Example, many young Iranians face double alienation, distrust from their government and suspicion from the world. 6. To sit at the table. A metaphor for participating in negotiations or decision-making. Example, for trust to be rebuilt, all sides must be willing to sit at the table again. 7. Blind optimism versus clear eyes. This contrast helps describe hope that's unrealistic versus hope that is thoughtful and informed. Example, we don't need blind optimism, we need clear eyes and steady progress. 8. Unlock access to. To gain the ability or opportunity to reach something valuable. Example, learning English unlocks access to global conversations and perspectives. 9. Truth depends on where you're standing. A useful phrase to explain that people's views are shaped by their experiences or positions in society. Example, for some, sanctions are a tool for safety. For others, they're a daily burden. Truth depends on where you're standing. 10. A fair system. This phrase is important for expressing ideas about justice and equity. Example, the real question is whether we're working toward a fair system for everyone. Now here's a little challenge. Choose 3 of these expressions and try using them in your own sentences. You can write them in your journal, share them in the comments, or use them in a conversation with a friend. The more you practice, the more naturally they'll come to you. Remember, language isn't just about understanding. It's about using it to express your view of the world. And your voice matters. So here we are, at the end of a long and complicated journey, a journey through history, politics, human emotion, and the power of language. You didn't just learn about Iran or sanctions or nuclear agreements. You learned how complex our world is, and how important it is to see the human story behind every headline. You also learned something else, something more personal. That even as an English learner, your role in the world is not small. In fact, by choosing to listen to thoughtful content, by choosing to engage with serious ideas in a second language, you're doing something many fluent speakers never do. You're practicing critical thinking in 2 languages. And that's powerful. Let's go back to the central question. Can trust be rebuilt? History shows that it's hard, but not impossible. Trust doesn't come from one big moment. It comes from many small choices, choosing to talk, choosing to listen, choosing to stay curious even when fear tells us to shut down. Diplomacy is one level. Education is another. But perhaps the deepest level is within each of us, how we choose to see the other. Do we see enemies? Or people we don't yet understand? Do we repeat what we're told? Or do we question, learn, and reach out? That's the real challenge. And that's the real hope. So let me leave you with one final question. If we don't try to understand people we fear, who will? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Even if it's just one sentence. even if it's just your reaction. That's how real conversations begin. Thank you for staying until the end. Your time is valuable, and I hope this lesson gave you not only better English, but also a bigger view of the world. If you found this helpful, consider liking the video, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who might also care about these topics. And if you want to see more lessons like this, lessons that go beyond language and into life, let me know. Until next time, keep learning, keep thinking, and keep listening deeply. Because learning English is also learning to stay awake. See you in the next lesson.